Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. The person we are speaking about today is a woman by the name of Al-Shifa bint Abdullah al-Adawiyya. Shifa bint Abdullah al-Adawiyya. And she is the daughter of Abdullah ibn Abd Shams and Fatima bint Wahab. She is married to Abu Hathma ibn Hudayfa radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, and they had two sons by the names of Suleiman and Masruq radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. So she is known as Al-Shifa bint Abdullah al-Qurashiyya al-Adawiyya. She is from Quraysh, and she's also from the tribe of Banu Adi, which is the tribe of Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And I forgot to mention that the first few bios that we are going to go through inshallah ta'ala in these short bios are all somehow connected to Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So that's how we're going to batch this first group inshallah ta'ala. So she is related to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and her name often comes up as if she's one of the tabi'at. She's someone that came later on in Islam, because the role that she became known for is after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, her reputation actually precedes Islam, and she is considered amongst the very first people to become Muslim. Okay, her name actually was not Al-Shifa, that was her nickname. Her name was actually Layla, but she gained the nickname Al-Shifa, and which of course refers to the healer, and this was something that would stick with her for the rest of her life. Now, what makes this woman so unique? Number one, her wisdom. She had a reputation for her hikmah. Number two, she was someone that belonged to the small group of people that were literate at the time. Remember when we spoke about Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said the majority of people were illiterate in Mecca. Al-Shifa was one of the few women who could actually read and write in Mecca, where they only had about 20 to 30 people, according to biographers, that were able to do so. So she acquired the skill of reading and writing, of literacy, which was very rare. She learned medicine as well, hence her name, Al-Shifa. And on top of that, she also was a calligrapher. So she didn't just know how to write, she used to teach people particularly how to do calligraphy. And so we find Hafsa radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a student of Al-Shifa, obviously related to her, and Al-Shifa taught her how to read, she taught her how to write, she taught her calligraphy as well. So when did she become Muslim? We don't have the exact time, but we know that it was within the first 3 years of the call of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that she embraced Islam. And she is also amongst the first women to make the hijrah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina. Now here's where it gets even more interesting with her. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam trusted her and took her as a confidant in seeking her advice in many matters due to her wisdom, particularly when it came to issues of finance, issues of the marketplace, where she had a particular understanding. So when they got to Medina, and she's considered amongst the first batch of women to make the hijrah, she had a house that was set up for her between the masjid and the marketplace. And that was the famous home of Al-Shifa that was very prominent in Al-Medina. So in Mecca, she was known for her healing, she was known for her reading, she was known for her writing. In Medina, her home was prominently situated between the masjid and the souq. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he used to visit her frequently. And this is where you see some of the beauty of the reverence that these people had for the Messenger ﷺ. She always anticipated the next time the Prophet ﷺ would visit her family. And so what she did was she had a particular izar, a particular blanket, particular amenities for the Prophet ﷺ for the rare times that he would come to her home. And when I say rare, obviously that is relative to everyone else. I mean, to live in Medina, to host the Prophet ﷺ is a moment that you will never forget, right? But she wanted the Prophet ﷺ to frequent her house even more. And so she has everything cut out and ready and prepared for the Prophet ﷺ as a guest whenever he would come. And so the Prophet ﷺ would visit her family, and the Messenger ﷺ would put on the izar and the blanket and use the amenities that she had for him. And the Prophet ﷺ would take a nap in their family home. So subhanAllah, I mean, think about how beautiful that is for her to have the honor of hosting the Prophet ﷺ frequently in Al-Madinah to learn from him alayhi salatu wasalam, to be a companion of his, and also to be consulted by him sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And when she passed away, her most precious belongings that she left for inheritance were not any of the wealth that she had acquired in Mecca or in her time in Medina, nothing that she had inherited from her husband, but rather the most precious belongings were the things, the clothes, the blanket, the things that the Prophet ﷺ used to use when he used to come to her home, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And so she actually allowed for Suleiman and Masruq, her children, to inherit those things, and that was considered the most precious of the inheritance of Al-Shifa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. There are a few stories of her. There's one narration in particular that we find in Abu Dawood, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered upon her and Hafsa radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and of course, as we said, she and Hafsa were very close, as she was considered from the extended family of Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So she says in an authentic hadith in Abu Dawood, دخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عند حفصة. The Prophet ﷺ entered upon I and Hafsa when we were sitting together, and he said to me, ألا تعلمين هذه رقية النملة كما علمتيها الكتاب. Will you not teach Hafsa how to perform a type of healing for ant bites, infections that come as a result of ant bites? Remember, she is a healer. She knows medicine. She knows how to do ruqya. And the Prophet ﷺ approved her to continue to do ruqya so long as it was grounded in what was coming from the Quran and the Sunnah, not from the practices of Jahiliyyah, but other types of medicine as well. So she had a particular way of treating ant bites. So the Prophet ﷺ said, will you not teach Hafsa how to cure ant bites and infections that come as a result of ant bites, the same way that you taught her how to read and how to write? So subhanAllah, why is this so important to us, and why is it something that is significant? Because we find that the Quran was gathered in the house of who? It was gathered in the house of Hafsa radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and some of the ulama mention that that is because of her literacy, right? That it was all gathered in her home, and she was unique in that sense. As there were only a few people that knew how to read and how to write. So Shifa had something to do with that, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, in teaching Hafsa radiyallahu anha how to read, how to write, how to use calligraphy, and also how to treat ant bites. So the Prophet ﷺ passes away, and she maintains that home. And there is a story that Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, when he became the Khalifa, he formally appointed her as being in charge of the marketplace. Now, there's nothing that is firm to suggest that entirely, but we do know that Umar radiallahu anhu, at the bare minimum, used to frequently consult her on matters of the marketplace, the fiqh of finance, business issues, and things of that sort. And of course, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who honored the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in every way, used to visit her home between the masjid and the marketplace, just as he saw the Prophet ﷺ used to do so. And so we find that Umar, as the Khalifa, would frequent this woman's house. And on one occasion, he asked her about her children, particularly Suleiman. So her son Masruq was appointed as an Amir somewhere, and he was considered a person of great knowledge, a person of great status under Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Masruq was appointed as an Amir. Her son Suleiman was a person who was known for his recitation of the Quran and his long nights of prayer. He was a hafiz, and he used to lead the people in prayer. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu on one occasion asked her why her son Suleiman was not present at the Fajr prayer, and she replied that Suleiman, her son, had been praying all night long, and he fell asleep right before Fajr, and so he wasn't able to actually catch the Fajr in Jama'ah. And so the famous narration of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where he said, "Usalli as-subh fil Jama'ah," for me to pray Fajr in congregation, ahabbu ilayya min an usalli al-layl, is more beloved to me than praying the entire night. If I'm able to catch Fajr in congregation, that's better than praying the entire night, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that whoever catches Isha in congregation, then it is as if that person has prayed the first half of the night, and whoever prays Fajr in congregation, it is as if they prayed the entire night. So that's actually the context of this particular narration from Al-Shifa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So we find again Suleiman and Masruq both play an integral role, and they the only lineage that we see that survives Shifa radiyallahu ta'ala anha is through her son Suleiman, who had two sons, and he named his two sons what? Abu Bakr and Uthman. Abu Bakr and Uthman. So Shifa, the relative of Umar, is the grandmother now of Abu Bakr and Uthman, and they became narrators of hadith. And so that is why we find some of the surviving ahadith of this woman who was very early on in Islam, Al-Shifa bint Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala anha al-Adawiyya. Amongst the famous ahadith that she narrates the famous hadith that we will talk about when we talk about this companion, of the letter that was sent to Kisra with Abdullah ibn Hudhafa radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So we'll talk about that hadith in a few weeks, inshallah ta'ala, and it's a powerful and beautiful story that we find in our history. She also narrates a famous hadith where she says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or she says about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam su'ila an afdal al-a'mal. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, what are the best of actions? And he said, imanun billah wa jihadun fi sabilillah wa hajjun mabrur. The belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to strive in the path of Allah, and a accepted and perfected Hajj. So Iman, Jihad and Hajj, this narration also comes through Al-Shifa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. The most famous thing that she narrates is the story of how Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu was named Amir al-Mu'mineen, the famous title that's given to him of the commander of the believers. Now, if you remember when we spoke about Umar radiyallahu anhu, when Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was alive as the Khalifa, it was simple. He was Khalifa to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He was the successor of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But you couldn't just keep having the Khalifa of Rasulullah and then the Khalifa of the Khalifa of the Khalifa of Rasulullah. And so there was a curiosity about what Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was going to be called. And so one of the beautiful stories here, and sometimes it's beautiful just to read about how the hadith or the narration is transmitted. Imam al-Zuhri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he narrates that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, asked Abu Bakr ibn Suleiman, so that's the grandson of Al-Shifa. He asked him, who was the first one to write Amir al-Mu'mineen? Who was the first person to call Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu by the name Amir al-Mu'mineen? Such a beautiful and endearing name, the commander of the believers. And he says, my grandmother Al-Shifa was one of the first women to make the hijrah. And when Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu went to visit her, he would frequent her on his way to the marketplace. And she told me that one time Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu wrote a letter to a governor in Iraq and said, send me two of your best men, so that I can ask them about Iraq and its people. So the two men were sent by this governor of Iraq, and they were Labid ibn Rabi'ah and Adi ibn Hatim. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them. So they came to Medina and they entered into the masjid. And as they entered into the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they found Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and they said to him, Ista'dhin lana ala Amir al-Mu'mineen. Can you seek permission from Amir al-Mu'mineen for us to enter upon him? And Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, Wallahi, you two have been granted success by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the name that you just addressed him by. فَهُوَ الْأَمِيرُ وَنَحْنُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. For he is the Amir, he is indeed the commander, and we are the believers. So he said that I then went to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and I said to him, Assalamu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Peace be unto you, O commander of the believers. And Umar radiyallahu anhu said, why are you calling me that, Ya ibn al-As? And he said that, well, Labid and Adi came to me, and this is what they said. And you are the Amir and we are the Mu'mineen. And from that day onwards, this is the name that Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu used to go by. So subhanAllah, this comes through a conversation literally between a grandmother and her grandson, which then is transmitted to the greatest grandson of Umar ibn Khattab, which was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the fifth of Khulafa al-Rashideen, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'een. May Allah be pleased with them all. So this is the role that she plays. She also has a narration similar to that of Aisha radiallahu anha, narrating the traits of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where she once saw some men that were walking very slowly, and she asked about them, and they said that these are people that were praying all night. And she said, كان عمر إذا حدث أسمع وإذا مشى أسرع وإذا أطعم أشبع وإذا ضرب أوجع. That Umar radiallahu anhu, when he used to speak, he used to make sure everyone heard him. He spoke loudly. And when he walked fast. And when he fed generously. And when he hit hard. So a similar narration to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that we also find from her, speaking about Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And we find that this great woman, who, was a woman of great scholarship, a woman of great literacy, and above all of that, a woman who embraced Islam in the very first years and had that noble position with the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would pass away, leaving behind some of the ahadith that are narrated by Al-Bukhari, Abu Dawood, and Nasa'i. And she passed away in the time of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would lead the janazah of this great woman, Al-Shifa bint Abdullah al-Adawiyya. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with her, and may Allah allow us to follow in their footsteps. Allahumma ameen.